ほら、ルフィ、今一緒に海賊になる仲間を探してるんだ。
Hello guys, welcome to my channel The Wandering Zoro, your go-to destination for anime-related content. And if you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out on our latest videos. In today's video, we're going to be diving into part 12 of the series. So be sure to stick around until the end, and let's get started. With a stretch and a yawn that showed off all his perfect white teeth, Izuku got up from the futon. He did go to sleep with his wings out, but they got in the way of lying down. He also poked Mina a few too many times, so he retracted them. She got up at the same time, grumbling about it being too early, but she followed her maid out of bed. She wore a too large shirt they had found in the dresser of the house they claimed. The shorts were baggy on her too, but she seemed comfortable in them. The house they slept in was in the village area of the simulation. It was nice with 3 bedrooms. Toshi and Shoji shared one, with Jairu and Yaoyorozu taking the other one, while Izuku and Mina claimed the biggest room. The rest of the pack took houses nearby for safety, and also because the 4 creatures Izuku created roamed the area at night when they slept. First Scowl duplicated or reproduced asexually, Izuku wasn't sure, to make doll. Then the 2 scavenged the remains of the griffin, and 2 more joined the pack of apex predators. Keel, the one with many spines on his body, was a frontline fighter. He had durable scales under the spines and 4 tendrils for lashing on his back when Izuku examined him the night before. Oriole was slim and designed for longer-range combat. He had crossbows Izuku sometimes used, but they were much larger and attached to his body. The bone bolts were longer and looked like they could punch through trees. His claws were also interesting since they resembled more of a prey bird than a canine, with backward-facing talons for gripping onto many surfaces. Izuku didn't look too deep into the anatomy of Oriole before he went to sleep, but he was interested in how his body produced the bolts. The 6 teens scavenged around the unfamiliar kitchen for breakfast to start their day. Toshi was grumbling all the while. When asked about his mood, he told them he didn't have his phone. The phone he often used to entertain himself when he lay sleepless due to his insomnia. They teased him about being too attached to his phone as they ate what they found. They turned from their food when they heard a ruckus outside, but when the sound stopped and everyone heard 4 howls, they looked at each other. They wandered outside to see what had happened. Behind one of the houses closer to the forest was a large corpse of a spider. It was the size of a truck. Jairu turned back inside with a quiet nope and went back to her breakfast. The pack of dogs, Izuku knew weren't dogs, but they looked like dogs, so they were dogs, sniffed at the spider. Multiple legs of the spider were broken, bone bolts were stuck in its body, and many lacerations covered the monster. Oriole leapt on the spider's back and absorbed the bone bolts into his body. Doll nibbled on one of the cracked legs, but shook his head and backed away, likely at the bad taste. Scowl was on the rooftops scanning the area and sniffing the air for more threats. And Keel sat proudly in front of his kill, his tendrils waving like tails on a dog. "That's a big F-off spider," Toshi said under his breath. "Rizzo, you think you can make some fire bombs or something?" He batted the tendril from Izuku that was poking him for saying a curse word. Yaoyorozu stared at the spider and shivered. Those kinds of spiders shouldn't wander from their web. Izuku and Shoji got closer to the enormous arachnid, so get a closer look. The 4 hunters saw Izuku's approach and gathered for attention. He obliged and praised each one for the good work protecting the pack. He rubbed Scowl's head, patted Doll's thick hide, scratched Keel's cheeks, and stroked Oriole's head in congratulations. They were happy and trotted beside Izuku to look over the spider. Yaoyorozu was right. This type of spider usually waded in their webs with their large bulbous abdomen and thin legs. Like a black widow, but without the red hourglass and longer body. "You think there are more?" Shoji asked the hunter. "Most likely." Izuku nodded. He examined the fangs of the spider, which were the size of his hands. "If their nest is nearby, then we will have to hunt them down." "All that is holy. Is that a giant spider?" They turned to the sound of Kaminari shouting down the road. Others of Izuku's pack were emerging from the houses lining the street. Kaken was scowling and getting closer to Izuku and Shoji next to the spider. He glared at the large beast. "Creepy fuckers," he said with a snarl. Pack of 1A ate their breakfast and began to scout the area for the nest of spiders. Everyone was on board to exterminate the giant arachnid nest. Most of them were comfortable with spiders. They are relatively harmless, and they cut down on pests, so they were usually captured and released outside. That changed when they were the sizes of buildings, and the pack was the size of the pests. Hooking up some cables to a small TV, Yaoyorozu got a camera feed from the drone she created to scout. Could have sent out some birds to come back if they found anything. It wasn't long before a bird came back to Kuta with information about the nest location. Yaoyorozu sent the drone in the direction the bird directed, into the city. Everyone was gathered around the TV, and most gasped when they saw at least 3 tall buildings coated in spiderwebs. The 4th building on the block was being invaded by spiders of all sizes to expand their territory. There was no clear leader, but they saw many spiders the size of the one the pack of dogs took down. "Yamamo, can't you just create some bombs to drop on all of that?" Jiro asked hopefully. Everyone turned to her, and she was about to lecture about the collateral damage, but paused. "I could, but we would need to deliver it in person. Also, we would need to leave quickly." Everyone then turned to Izuku. Izuku shrugged. "I'll be your carpet bomber." He smiled with all his teeth showing. "But I want one of those bomber hats from that one movie. With goggles." He pointed at Yaoyorozu. Adorned with his brown synthetic leather cap and goggles, Izuku looked at the now 4 buildings covered in spiderwebs. His pack stood a few blocks away on top of a building that overlooked the targeted area. They could all see the swarms of spiders crawling along the webs and the many creatures caught in them. Some were being wrapped up for consumption, and others were left stuck in the thick webs. He turned from the view to Yaoyorozu, who was nervously checking over the barrel they had filled with extremely volatile explosives. It took a while for Yaoyorozu to create the substance, and had to eat 3 large meals to fill the barrel. Some of the pack were drawing on the sides of the barrel. They had found paint in one of the houses, and Mina proposed to decorate the bomb that should level 4 skyscrapers and everything inside. They had taped stabilizer fins on the side and put a cone on top to make it more aerodynamic on the drop. The fins were cut from thin wood, and the cone was a piece of tin bent into shape and then taped together. The sides were painted with everything you could imagine, from crude messages to the spiders to a cute drawing of a stereotypical bomb that Kuta drew. "All right, I believe it's ready. The glass bottle is set for the chain reaction, so all you need to do is drop it from a safe distance. It shouldn't fail. Even so, I set a small-time device inside to go off in case it gets caught in the webs, miraculously." Yaoyorozu stood up and looked at Izuku. He turned from the buildings almost a mile away and nodded confidently. "I got this. You got this." Mina copied and pulled his goggles off. His forehead down to his eyes. She kissed his cheek and smiled. "Now, rain hellfire." Izuku beamed at her and moved to pick up the barrel. Uraraka tapped the barrel and smiled at him. The plan was for Izuku to carry the barrel and then dive-bomb the location. When Uraraka saw him diving for more than a second, she would drop her quirk and he would let the bomb go. He began his ascension to the skies. His pack saluted him, and he was off. Bit by bit, Izuku disappeared into the clouds in the sky for a proper distance to drop his payload. Uraraka brought up binoculars to her eyes, ready to drop the use of her quirk. "So, how confident are you that it'll get rid of the spiders?" Mina asked Yaoyorozu as they looked at the infested buildings. When Yaoyorozu didn't answer immediately, she began to get nervous. "You are confident, right?" Yaoyorozu bit her lip. "Well, I've never made this substance, so." Mina looked at her friend and then turned to the clouds. "It'll be fine, right?" She chuckled anxiously. "Of course, I'll be fine. It's Yaoyorozu we're talking about. She knows her stuff even if she's never created whatever that stuff was," Uraraka said confidently, not taking her eyes off the location where Izuku was supposed to emerge from the clouds. The class stood watching and waiting for Izuku to appear again. It didn't take long before he emerged from the clouds in a dive, his wings tucked in slightly for the best drop. Even from so far away, they could see his wide, feral smile. Izuku was laughing in joy as he dropped like a rock from the stratosphere. His mouth began to dry out, so his bone plates grew to cover his mouth from catching the wind. When he felt Uraraka release her quirk on the bomb, Izuku pulled his wings up and let go of the barrel. He continued to dive down, but his wings carried him away from the drop site at an angle at high speed. All according to the plan. Good, all looks good." Yaoyorozu looked eager to see how effective her creation was. The barrel disappeared between the 4 skyscrapers, and everyone held their breaths. For a split second, there was a flash of light. Then the buildings evaporated, they came apart, and debris shot out with the shockwave. Yaoyorozu widened her eyes in horror. The yield was much larger. Down. She grabbed whoever was nearest to her and yanked them down with her. Before she dropped down, she witnessed Izuku in the sky before the blast wave obscured her vision. He was much closer than they were. They heard the sound of countless windows shattering as the blast wave overtook them. The building they stood on shook violently, and everyone had the same thought. Would the tall skyscraper drop with them still on it? The blast wave passed, and the class remained disoriented on the roof. Their hearing was ringing, and they were shaken. Slowly, they stood up on unsteady legs and looked at the devastation of the bomb. The spiders were obliterated. The targeted buildings were gone. The city block has a large crater, and the surrounding buildings were damaged beyond repair. There should have been a dense cloud of dust, but the bomb was created too well, and the blast took care of that too. Izuku. That was the first thing Yaoyorozu heard. She was pale and sweaty at seeing the devastation. She turned to Mina, who she had pulled down with her. Mina looked horrified and scanned the area where Izuku was last, but he was nowhere to be found. He's strong. He'll be fine, she said to herself as she kept looking. Ponytail. What the hell was that? Kaken yelled. The yield was larger than predicted. This was the first time I've used it. Yaoyorozu responded. I recently learned of it and thought it was a good idea, but it's clear that the yield was vastly understated or it has an exponential blast depending on the amount detonated. She rambled on nervously. I'm so sorry, Mina. I didn't know. She began to tear up. Yaoyorozu felt a pair of strong arms around her. He'll be all right, he's strong. He'll be back. She both said it to reassure Yaoyorozu and herself. Izuku was not all right. He was lying against a tree and injured severely. The blast of the bomb sent him flying into the woods, and he landed harshly. He was in extreme pain from the multiple injuries, but he dulled the pain to a throb. From bottom to top, his left leg from the knee down was just gone, sheared off by debris flying faster than he could dodge. Right leg damaged by smaller debris, but easily managed. The abdomen had many ruptured organs and lacerations due to supersonic debris. His lungs were punctured and deflating, but he could deal with that in a moment. His wings were shredded from the shockwave, but that was unimportant. His tail was damaged, but it was just hardened bone, so it was an easy fix. His unlucky arm? Gone. No clue how that happened, but he had a stump for an arm. His other arm was miraculously undamaged. His head was marginally all right compared to how the rest of his body was. He was still focusing on making sure nothing was wrong with his brain before he moved on to his body and the hundreds of fractures across it. It was getting late when Izuku's first prey approached his mangled body. The BLD must have attracted the literal dinosaur approaching him. Izuku stared at the creature from the ancient past as it smelled him. He still hadn't moved from his spot in favor of fixing himself before he moved. He was unconscious for hours before he regained it, and it was already past noon when he had awakened. So he had missed his lunch, and he was ravenously hungry. The dinosaur was at least 6 feet tall and 7 long from the sharp tooth muzzle to the tip of its long tail. Izuku could tell immediately it was a hunter, but it was lacking. Its arms were short and unsuited for grabbing, eyes too far apart, and it was loud. He had to admit the legs looked strong and made from chasing down prey. Its claws looked nice and sharp with the largest claw hovering over the rest, ready to pierce its prey. And the teeth looked vicious. It was a shame that Izuku was starving and his prey came to him. The velociraptor approached confidently to the immobile Izuku and lowered its head to sniff its meal. The hunter stuck faster than it could react. His hand grabbed a hold of its neck, claws digging deep into it as his spear-tipped tail pierced where he thought its heart was. He guessed correctly as the dinosaur stiffened and died. Tendrils extended from his body as it was rapidly consumed. All that was left was a talon from its leg as a trophy. He attached it to his waist next to the talon of the griffin that was still there. It was one of the first things he checked. All the iron in the body of the dinosaur was sent to his leg to recreate it. He could go without an arm, but not a missing leg. It didn't take long before his leg was back to how it was, but with the missing reinforcement of steel covering it. He could still walk on it, but using it to move rapidly would fracture it due to the muscles being too strong for it. He slowly began to move, and then stood up. Most of his weight was on the thick tree he sat against. He finally got a chance to take in his surroundings. He was in the woods. Not the first time waking up in the woods. He was in the thick forest, and all he saw were trees, brush, and more trees. For now, he decided on a direction and began to walk. He needed more mass to fix himself, and he was still hungry. Just in time, there was a screech of something in the woods. Some sort of deer ran past him, and then another. Dozens of deer creatures fled from what made the sound earlier. Izuku grabbed one of the fleeing deer and quickly killed it. It was torn apart and consumed within minutes. He turned when he heard footsteps getting closer. A large form rounded a tree, its clawed hands pushing against the tree to get past it. It stood 10 feet tall and had a humanoid appearance with 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head in the correct locations. On top of that, it had a thick lizard-like tail, bloody razor-sharp teeth, and was covered in a thick leathery hide. Its maw was similar to a crocodile, but shorter. The odd thing out was it had horns like his. It was hunched over slightly, but Izuku could tell immediately that this was a predator. The predator turned its small eyes onto Izuku and growled. Izuku stood from the bloody mess and shifted. His missing arm was replaced by dozens of tendrils intertwined to shape his limb. Claws extended from his tendril hand while a spear was held in the other. His goggles were placed on his forehead, and his second pair of eyes opened to stare the predator down. The hunter growled back, and the predator watched him. It raked its claws on the tree as if it was sharpening them for combat. The hunter crouched to pounce, ready for BLD. The predator roared in a challenge and charged forward. The hunter roared back and leaping into the charge of the predator. The hunter dodged to the side as the reptilian creature tried to slam both of its claws down on him. He returned the attack by raking his claw on the leg of the creature. His claws skittered off the thick scales and did no damage. This didn't stop him as he leaped onto the creature's back to get at its neck. The creature responded by throwing itself back with all its strength against a tree. They both slammed into it and then threw it. The hunter took the brunt of it. The creature righted itself and backed away quickly to lower itself into a crouched position to pounce the hunter. The hunter, for his part, rolled onto his legs and readied himself for the next round. Izuku stared at the creature and could see its intelligence as it watched him instead of attacking without restraint. This wasn't a wild animal, but a worthy predator. The predator leapt from one side to another at an angle to the hunter, gaining speed with each movement. The hunter held in place and took the attack head-on. Long claws raked the air to tear the hunter in half, and he formed a shield made of carapace. The claws dug deep into the shield, and the hunter used his tail to strike at the predator's abdomen. The predator roared in pain and used its tail to hit the hunter. Leaping over the thick appendage, he landed and propelled himself to a nearby tree trunk. His nun-reinforced leg bones cracked, but he paid it no mind. He used the tree trunk as a springboard to push himself towards the predator. With his spear leading the charge, he penetrated deep into the thick scales on the side of the predator. Once again, it roared and slammed his clawed fist down on the hunter's back. He was slammed down, and the predator pounced just as the hunter rolled over. One clawed hand stabbed into the hunter's shoulder, and the other missed by inches. The hunter roared in pain and used his tail to spear the forearm of the predator. BLD sprayed over the hunter as the arm was mangled when the predator pulled the hand back, causing the spear-tipped tail to split the hand down the middle. The predator roared and used its whole hand to rake against the hunter's face. Claws met claws as the hunter blocked the attack and used his free hand to grab the predator's injured arm. He pulled, and the predator went with the movement to avoid more pain, causing the predator to fall and the hunter to roll on top of it. Pinning one clawed hand with his clawed hand and the other too injured to be of any use, he used his free hand to grab one of the horns to pull the head up. It caused the neck to be exposed, and the hunter opened his jaws wide and bit down. He yanked to the side, and a large chunk of flesh was torn away as BLD sprayed all over the hunter. The thrashing of the predator slowed and then stopped under the hunter. He held the predator's head still as it bled out and mentally gave it respect for a worthy fight. When it finally died, the hunter roared in triumph and the thick forest shook at the sound. Izuku hopped from tree to tree as he tried to get higher to see where he should go to find his pack. With a new trophy on his waist, the skull of the predator without its jaw, he reached the top of the tallest tree and looked around. He was surprised to see the city, the only other thing visible other than woods, far in the distance. At least 10 to 20 miles away. He sprouted his wings, flapped them once, and then paused. He looked down at the thick woods and then at the skull. His pack was strong, and they had 4 apex predators to help them stay alive. He looked down at the woods between himself and the city. He smiled and his wings retracted into his back. The pack didn't need him too soon. With that settled, he dropped from the tree top and eagerly scanned the woods he found himself in. With his impeccable sense of direction to lead the way, he began to make his way through the woods. Back at the village, Mina bit at her fingernail in worry. Her hand was pulled away from her teeth by Jairu. You need to calm down and find something to do. Sitting here, tearing your fingernails apart won't make him come back faster. Plus, I can hear it, and it's gross. Jairu said, scrunching her nose in disgust. Mina sighed and slumped onto the table. They were seated outside on a patio eating their lunch when her mate came back into her mind. She was worried if he was still alive or not. If she knew that at least, then she would know whether he was all right or not. If he died, then he was out of the simulation. If he was alive, then nothing could stop him from coming back. The issue was that she didn't know. What if he was unconscious somewhere or was lost deep in the woods? What should I do then? Mina asked with her head still on the table. I don't know. Go with the guys and help them with the hole. Jairu motioned to the beach nearby. Mina turned her head to see most of the guys in her pack digging away in the sand with their hands and shovels. It started with Kaminari digging a small hole so he could sit in it for whatever reason. First, Shiro and Kirishima joined, and then one by one just about all the guys joined in. The only ones who didn't join in digging a hole to the center of the simulation were Kuta and Aoyama, who sat on beach towels nearby. Kaken got roped in by some teasing, and Ida was easily convinced when asked about the proper use of a shovel. Todoroki was one of the first ones to push sand out of the hole with his ice. It looked like he thoroughly enjoyed it. Mina sighed and straightened from her seated position. I'm sure Izuku is alive and fine. She snorted a laugh. Hell, he's probably having the time of his life without having to worry about keeping us safe. She looked over to the thick woods. The hunter laughed with glee as he dodged a spear move from a pig-nosed humanoid with green skin. Another one of its kind swung its sword down at the hunter's back, and he dodged it while yanking the spear from the other and used it to stab deep into his chest. The spear user roared in fury at seeing his weapon being used to claim the life of one of its kind. The fury was short-lived as he was lifted off the ground by clawed hands driving deep into his abdomen from under him. The pig-nosed humanoid spat BLD into the hunter's face as he pulled a knife and stabbed down at his neck. He was a true warrior, and he died as he lived. Jairu huffed a laugh and nodded with her friend. Oh, I can totally see that. I'll bet you that he'll come back with trophies adoring his whole body. God, that is so metal to imagine. The two girls turned when Hagakure called out to them. Yo, since we can't go to the beach because Thulu and its sibling are in the ocean, we brought the ocean to us. Do not call his name, lest we call attention to ourselves. Tokoyami admonished the invisible girl and looked worriedly at the sea. Hagakure waved off the bird-headed student. Yeah. Anyways, come on. She pulled at Jairu's and Mina's arms. They joined the rambunctious girl to see the boys finish digging a deep and wide hole and move on to digging a trench from the hole to the water to fill it. They dug the trench with such coordination that Mina could believe they worked in construction all their lives. With single-minded focus, they reached the waters and cheered when the water flowed to begin filling the hole. Immediately, everyone began to get into the pool. Some others began to create another hole for those who wanted to soak in the water without being splashed. I don't know about you guys, but this vacation is pretty nice. Not including all the fantasy and horrific monsters here with us. Kaminari said as he floated on his back. Sato with Todoroki was digging yet another hole in the sand, answered his friend. Yeah, those monsters are a downer on the vacation. Especially those spiders. He shivered at the memory. Good thing Yamamo evaporated them. Hagakure laughed while sitting on an inflatable tube. She quieted and added softly. Hopefully, Izuku is all right. She glanced over to the pack of 4 hellhounds roughhousing with enough strength to snap bones on a normal person. The feral animal is fine. I've seen him take injuries that would kill anyone else. On top of that, he is in a buffet to heal himself. Kaken reminisced back at the training camp, and how half of Izuku's face was burned down to the bones when he took a blow that would have killed him outright. Hell, I seriously doubt there is anything he couldn't take down. Toshi used a pool noodle to lazily doggy paddle around the pool. Ah, is Kaken praising little Izu? How sweet. He teased. Kakin countered the teasing by pushing Toshi's head underwater. "Shut it, troll hair." Toshi came up from under the water looking like a drowned dog. His hair was matted to his head, and the usual fluff on his head was around his neck. He glared at Kakin. "Go bury yourself up to your neck in the sand." His quirk took hold, and the blonde got out of the pool mechanically. He began digging a hole for himself. Kirishima grinned and began to help the brainwashed packmate. Shiro and Kaminari jumped out of the pool and did the same with wicked smiles. Mina looked over at them and shook her head. She knew what would happen once Kakin got out. Ida felt the urge to stop them, but he reminded himself that they were on vacation in the simulation, not that it felt too much like it with all the beasts. Thinking about beasts, Ida wondered how Izuku was doing. He hoped he would get back to them soon. The beast in question was currently on a small opening surrounded by bodies of pig-nosed warriors, their weapons strewn around and their armor shattered. He had just finished a battle with their leader. He was twice as strong with feathers adorning his helmet. The leader used a large double-sided axe that he used very masterfully to cut off one of Izuku's arms at the elbow and sheared a horn of his head. It was a glorious fight in Izuku's opinion, and from a great fight came a great trophy. He picked up the double-sided axe. It was heavy, but nothing Izuku couldn't handle. He set it on his back, and a tendril held it for him. He turned in the direction of the city. He was headed, and numerous trophies rattled around his waist. Skulls, claws, fangs, and even monkey's clawed paw. The monkey was one of the toughest fights due to its speed and seemingly ability to disappear from his sight when losing line of sight. The whole monkey was only the size of his head, but it was vicious in its guerrilla tactics. Just as he was going to leave, he looked at the bodies. It would be a waste to leave them, but he wasn't hungry and his stores were full. He did think of making something like Skal again, but he didn't need more skirmishers like them. Maybe a heavy hitter? With a shrug, he jammed his hand into the leader's chest and began to experiment. He wanted his new companion to be strong. He began with the skeleton and made it dense, but with enough flexibility for the bones not to shatter if they encounter a greater force. The nervous system wouldn't need to be too high since he wasn't making it for speed. Muscles would be extremely dense, more so than his. He wanted to see them tear a tree out by the roots. Tendons and ligaments would need to be just as strong to keep up. Strong but spongy organs to make them take an impact without serious damage. Now, the exterior. He shaped them like a gorilla. They could use their large arms to run with, and their shorter legs would maintain stability. And what's better than two incredibly strong arms? For incredibly strong arms, he set the second set right under the first pair. Dexterous hands to grab things, but thick and vicious-looking knuckles to tear anything that got in his path. His second pair of hands were the opposite, with razor-sharp claws that looked very similar to his. Thumbs were a given. Everyone needed thumbs. The skin will be covered in thick fur and scales for added protection. Their head would be simple with 4 eyes like Izuku's. Teeth for both vegetation and meat. And its nose didn't need to be anything special. With his image clear, Izuku's tendrils grabbed more and more bodies to fuel the creation of his creation. Some were used for material to add to the leader, and some were consumed to keep the creature alive as it was born. While Izuku knew the word born wasn't entirely correct, he liked to believe it fit. Something is born when it's first creation, whether that be from a newborn from a mother, a chick from an egg, or a biological assimilation to become something new. Just as Izuku was going to feed another body to his creation, a tendril shot out from the forming body and grabbed the body from his hand. It wrapped around Izuku's wrist and froze. Then it let go of him and only took the body. Izuku stared in fascination at the reaction it just had. Both the growing of tendrils to feed and its knowledge that Izuku wasn't food. The only commands he gave to the cells were to keep themselves alive, protect the pack, and not to duplicate. He didn't need hundreds of super gorillas by the end of his vacation. There wouldn't be anything to hunt then. Izuku stared at his creation's fur finish growing and then stopped. A pair of powerful lungs inflated for the first time, and his 4 eyes opened. He began to shuffle on the ground, stretching muscles, and feeling his surroundings. He touched the earth with his hands and sniffed the air. He looked around and then shuffled to sit up. Using all 4 of his arms to stand up and looked around and looked at himself as best as he could. Then he looked up at Izuku. He hooted in a sort of greeting, and then he did it again in joy. Izuku smiled, showing all his teeth. The creature hopped, and the forest shook at its landing. He got louder and louder until it culminated into a roar that shook the forest. He pounded his chest in exultation, and Izuku joined his newest creature with his own roar. Back on the beach, the 19 packmates and 4 hounds turned their heads to the forest where they all saw flocks of birds take off, and a distant roar echoed. The 4 hounds turned to the skies and howled with the distant roar. The packmates already knew what must have happened, and they waited to see what Izuku walked back with. Finished with the roar, Izuku turned to his newest companion. "You are strong, I say, Nork." Nork hooted in joy at his name. He pounded his chest with one hand. Izuku grinned and nodded. "Good, let's find our pack." There was a screech of a dinosaur like the one Izuku first killed, and Nork turned to show his prowess. Izuku stepped back to see what he could do. The dinosaur heard their racket and came to find a meal, but instead, it found Nork's fist uppercutting it in the chest. The dinosaur had no chance of surviving that blow as it practically exploded from the sheer power put behind the strike. The leaves above them were coated in red. Izuku nodded with pursed lips. He gave Nork a thumbs up when he turned to his creator for his thoughts. "Nice job, but next time use less power, less messy." He motioned to the red dripping on them from the canopy. Nork hooted and nodded. He turned to the mess left behind and sniffed distastefully before following Izuku to where the end of the woods should be. The two walked through the woods, and Izuku chatted to Nork about their pack. He told him about them and what they were like. Nork listened to Izuku, all the while they tore through anything that got in their way. It wasn't long before the tree line opened up to the beach where his pack lay around in pools of water or cooked on grills. The pack turned when the hounds barked and ran to greet Izuku and their newest brother. Izuku beamed at all of them and went to join and introduce Nork to his pack. Nork, for his part, hooted in greeting to his elder brothers and followed their creator to their packmates. The hounds ran around Nork in excitement at having such a large brother. Dahl was already trying to bull him over to play. Izuku felt happy with his pack getting along so well. "Get some clothes on," was the first thing Izuku heard from his pack. He wasn't sure who yelled it, but he did glance down at himself. His lower bits were covered with a leather pelt from the predator he fought first when he woke up. His clothes were torn asunder from the blast, but that didn't bother him. It wasn't the first time he was NDE in the woods. He was greeted by his mate who ran up to him with a big hug and smile. He caught her and returned the hug as the rest of his pack gathered around him and Nork. They greeted him with the same gusto as always. Yayarosa tried to apologize to him for the danger she put him in, but Izuku waved it off. He was just happy to see them safe. They asked him about the deep woods and what he had found in it. Izuku happily told them about his fights and the numerous trophies he had gathered in his trek. He presented each one in the order of collecting them and told them the creature he took them off of. As the feral class president regaled the pack of his exploits, Jairu leaned over to Mina and said quietly enough that Izuku wouldn't hear. "He doesn't remember that this is a simulation and nothing we get here comes out." Mina's smile strained as she nodded. "I'm well aware. Let him have his fun," she whispered back. She happily took the upper skull of a large reptilian creature, and Izuku beamed with joy at seeing her pride in him. "Yo, Zu, what about this big guy? You say his name is Nork?" Sato asked the large four-armed gorilla who was gently roughhousing Kirishima. Nork was seated as Kirishima was trying to pin one arm alone, but was failing. For his part, Nork was hooting in a laugh as he easily manhandled the redhead. When Dahl joined in, Nork was bowled over, and the real fight began. The three rolled in the sand, and everyone who wasn't as fragile watched it happen. Izuku shrugged. "When I finished fighting the tribe of those pig people," he pulled the dual-headed axe off his back and sunk the blade into the sand. There were a lot of them and didn't want to waste all the biomass. "We have a pack of hunters." He motioned to the 4 dogs. "Now, we have a heavy hitter. If you're calling Nork a heavy hitter, then he must be stronger than all of us put together," Kaken said with his arms crossed. "That's a good point. How strong is he?" Kaminari asked. Izuku pursed his lips and tilted his head in thought. He punched a dinosaur, and it exploded. Everyone turned to Izuku to gauge his face to see how much he was exaggerating. "Oh, my God, you're not joking." Siyu said almost immediately as she saw his facial expressions. "He exploded a dinosaur?" Toshi asked incredulously. "Small ankle bitters, or?" Sato raised his hand to guess the height of the creature. Kuda raised the claw he was looking at from Izuku's collection of trophies. "This is from a velociraptor." He turned sheepish when everyone turned to him, the question unasked. I went through a phase when I was younger. Hold on a patty flipping minute. Zero exclaimed. Since when were there dinosaurs? Are there those giant pterodactyls? He frantically looked into the sky. You mean pterosaurs? Kuda asked. If it's the flying one that can swallow us whole, then yes. He scrambled under Shoji's arms and used them as shelter. Hagakure pointed out another threat. What about that dragon we saw? Can't that do the same? And breathe fire? As they panicked about flying titans in the sky, Izuku plopped down next to Mina on the sands. He bumped his head with hers, and she reciprocated with a giggle. The two enjoyed watching Zero show his fear of giant flying beings by hiding under various things. Scal joined his creator and lay down by Izuku. He patted the creature as he enjoyed being back with his pack. Later, Izuku twirled the dual-headed axe he took from the orc chief. He was told what they were by Sato. The axe was nice, but it wasn't his style, so he jammed it into the wood of a nearby wall and let it be. He hummed in thought at his selection of weapons. He usually stuck with claws and fangs, but also used his tail, spears, and even bolts. Maybe he could create a spear like Yamamo carried around. He was pretty adept at using one, even though he was never formally trained in using it. He did have a surplus of biomass, and playing with his quirk was always fun, so he got started. He didn't honestly think he would keep the spear or make it a permanent fixture to himself, but it was fun to experiment. He began simply by making a core of bone with a latticework inside the bone. He tested out various kinds of latticeworks to see which one held the best for his uses and found a honeycomb pattern to be adequate. With the interior finished, he moved on to the exterior. So he didn't use so much steel from his body. He just made the spear tip covered in metal. The blade was wide and thin as he could make it without it bending. What he could do that regular blacksmiths couldn't was also add a lattice inside the metal to make it even sturdier. He grinned as he twirled the spear. It was just as tall as he was, and probably the strongest thing he made so far. Yaoyorozu was watching him make the weapon in interest and came over to see his work. He happily presented it as she asked to see it. She asked about the lightweight but hardness of the spear, and Izuku explained his idea of saving mass with latticework. That intrigued her greatly, and she kept questioning him about the idea. Soon enough, she was seated in the sand also experimenting with making items with latticework both to save on material and its weight while keeping its strengths. While Izuku helped Yaoyorozu with her quirk, something was happening a few dozen feet away with two pack members. Kaminari and Kirishima had the wonderful idea to play with the dual-headed axe their pack leader brought back with him. It started with Kaminari using all his strength to yank the weapon from the wood post, causing it to come out and hit Kirishima. Luckily, Kirishima had a good reaction time and hardened his body to block the accidental strike. From there, Kaminari began to swing at Kirishima with his skin hardened with a giant grin on his face with the redhead mirroring him. It was only when Kaminari began to scream is when everyone in the area spun to see him clutching at a profusely bleeding hand. Their first serious injury occurred. Izuku immediately sprinted off the sand by Yaoyorozu, and she was right behind him. Kirishima was looking pale and unsure how to help as he hovered over his friend. Todoroki, I need ice, Kirishima yelled out. Izuku soon found out why Kirishima needed ice. 2 fingers lay on the sand, and Kaminari had 2 stumps where they belonged. As the blonde kept sobbing in pain, Izuku got to work. After all, he'd work with worse. Izuku picked up the 2 digits and grabbed Kaminari by the arm. Don't stop screaming. Worry, I can fix it. My fucking fingers. Kaminari screamed. Don't use bad words. Izuku screamed back and grabbed the wrist with the bleeding stumps. Yaoyorozu made a bowl, and with the help of Todoroki, used water to rinse off the sandy fingers. This might hurt a bit. It already F. Kaminari yelped even louder. Then he looked at his hand in worry. It stopped hurting. That's bad, right? What Kaminari didn't see was Izuku's tendril in his wrist. With his knowledge of biology so advanced, he knew exactly where to find the right nerve to stop feeling in his hand to begin to heal him. It's fine. Just look at the clouds or something. He waved off the concerns as he focused on reattaching the fingers. He grabbed one from a sickly-looking Yaoyorozu and stared at it. Which one was this one? He mumbled and imagined placing it on one of the stumps. He shook his head and placed it on the other stump. It looked correct, so he began. With most of his pack watching on, Izuku began splicing nerves back together, mending bones, and sewing flesh to how it should be. Hair-thin tendrils wove in and out of the finger as he made sure veins were correct and nerves were aligned. He hummed in satisfaction at the first finger beginning to pump BLD again, and the nerves began to fire signals properly. He could tell each nerve working properly as he sent signals through the tendril in Kaminari's wrist. The second finger was just as simple, and soon enough, Izuku smiled proudly as he looked at his handiwork. There, all done, Izuku said proudly. He retracted his tendril blocking the nerve in Kaminari's wrist, and he yelped in pain before sighing in relief at the lack of intense pain. The blonde cried in relief as he opened and closed his hand with no issue. Kirishima also looked just as relieved. Even though he was soaked in BLD from his fingers, he was as healthy as he could be, just with some BLD loss. Kaminari exhibited BLD loss as he tried to stand up only to stumble and fall on the bloodied sand. Izuku didn't look worried as he lay in front of him groaning in a dizzy spell. Bro. Kirishima sat his friend up and looked worriedly. It's just BLD loss, but that doesn't matter. What does matter is how did he lose 2 fingers? Izuku asked with crossed arms. He looked at the axe and picked it up. Kirishima looked bashfully away from his pack leader's eyes. We were sparring with the axe. He hit me with it and ricocheted back to himself, and his hand went high on the handle. Izuku wasn't surprised at the answer. Even so, Ida and Yaoyorozu admonished the two for doing something so dangerous without reason. While they berated the two, Izuku looked at the axe blades. Chipped and worn metal with just a bit of Kaminari's BLD staining it. He sniffed the metal and frowned. He looked at Kaminari, who was looking much too pale just for BLD loss. He liked the blade to the disgust of his packmates and found what he guessed was on it. He turned to Kaminari and he was lethargic. Izuku concentrated some viral cells in his hand and pushed them through modified pores on his skin to mimic Nem's quirk to aerosol his cells. The cells immediately were breathed in by Kaminari, and he coughed. Izuku, what are you doing? Kirishima yelled out in a panic. He waved off the panicked looks on everyone's faces. I'm pretty sure Kami was sick with whatever was on the blade. I don't get sick, so I had him take my cells so he wouldn't die or something. Also, there might be an experiment he wanted to see if he could do to negate a great weakness in himself. What was on the axe? Poison? Toshi asked with a frown. Izuku shook his head. Don't think so. I think it's a disease or sickness. Not entirely sure, but it got into Kami through BLD. He pointed at the streak of BLD on the blade. Either way, he should be fine. Everyone turned to Kaminari, who was unconscious and breathing softly. So he has your cells? Shoji asked immediately. Izuku nodded. Yep. With the basic function of destroying any diseases or things that would make him sick. They'll replicate and clean him until whatever was on the axe is gone. Couldn't you give that out in the real world to everyone to cure all diseases, cancers, and whatever else? Hagakure asked. She shrunk into herself slightly when Izuku turned his feral eyes on her. I thought about that, but I didn't think it was a good idea. Sure, it would cure everyone, but then my cells would take over their body a bit at a time. Worst case scenario, someone decides to use my super cure and turn it into a weapon of mass destruction. Which, honestly, seems easy to do. All you would need is someone who could manipulate quirks to work on my super cure to make it do things that would be classified as war crimes all around the world. He made the bunny ears an emphasis. While it would be great to spread a super cure, there would be too great of a risk of something happening. He emphasized his point by dropping a bead of BLD on the sand. The red dot began to wriggle around, seeking nutrients that it would never find. What about my people you've helped? Ida stuttered. Like Kane. He quickly added. Izuku shrugged. No one knows, so it should be fine, probably. He said with a pause. As for my cells replacing his, it shouldn't have any adverse effects. After all, a person is that person because of their mind and memories, not their fleshy bits. Kirishima's eyebrows raised. Bro, that's deep. Yeah, how'd you come up with that? I mean, I agree, but... Siro trailed off. Kaken finished what Siro was going to say. You're not the most intellectual person, he said bluntly. Izuku looked offended and forced tears to CRP up at the corners of his eyes. Are you calling me dumb? Mina was always close by, so she quickly jumped into the joke. She brought his head down and hugged him. How dare you call Aiza dumb? He's the smartest one here, she said as she stroked his hair. He does spend a lot of his time in his den, Toshi said blandly. He doesn't just lay around doing nothing. Recalling all the times Izuku, and he spent time chatting about inane things before UA. Sometimes about fun things like fictional stories, and other times about physiological things like what Izuku just mentioned. Really? I always thought he sunned himself, like a lizard or something, Jairu said with a smirk. Well, that too, Toshi said, sharing the smirk with her. Izuku mumbled. It feels nice, he said, pouting. Mina, having joined Izuku sunning himself more than once, had to agree. She let go of him and hooked his arm with hers. Well, what do we do with Sparky here? She motioned to the unconscious Kaminari. Izuku shrugged. Bed rest and food should be fine. I used most of my mass to heal him, but the BLD loss and brief exposure to that infection wore him out. My cells should be wiping out all the impurities out of him as we speak. It'll be a while if it's taking all his impurities. Jairu snarked. They moved Kaminari into a bed and left him some water and food for him when he woke. Could have decided to take the first shift of watching him, just in case. While everyone got back to what they were doing, Izuku thought about the super cure he could create for his pack. While he did want to keep them safe and healthy, pumping his cells into them was a risk. What would happen to his cells if he died? Would they all die with him? What if someone could use his cells for something bad? Izuku pondered for a long time, and no one bothered him. They could see he was deep in thought. Maybe an hour later, the feral boy decided. He would give them a choice. He trusted them and wanted them to stay healthy. He could easily make his cells follow the order to help eliminate any sickness or disease that entered their bodies, to work as an additive to their immune systems. After all, if he replaced their immune systems with his and something happened to him, they would be exposed to the weakest sicknesses. His cells would replicate only when it was needed and only stay where they should be. They would replace all the cells in their bodies like Kaminari's probably did. With his plan thought up, he leapt down from the roof he perched on and gathered his pack. He offered the super cure, as Hagakure called it, to anyone in his pack. He explained how it would be different and only stay with their immune systems. His cells would hover near their T cells to help their immune system. If they encountered something their immune system might not be able to handle, their cells would take over the job until the threat was gone. What about the risk? How you mentioned someone using your cells for a weapon? Shoji asked, and all his pack nodded. Izuku shook his head. It's worth the risk, Gus said determined. I would rather see you all as healthy as you can be. Oh, Hagakure cried out and hugged him. That's so sweet of you. The feral boy smiled and patted Hagakure's back as he returned the hug. Mina was right beside her as she squeezed him in her arms. After all the smiles and hugs were given, everyone agreed to try out the super cure, named by himself, in the simulation. If something went wrong, then there wouldn't be any permanent damage. So, how are we going to do this? Shots like in a doctor's office? Toshi asked. Izuku hummed and snapped his fingers with a smile. I want to do it with a super move I probably won't use in the real world. Kaken narrowed his eyes at his old friend. Why not? Everyone circled Izuku as to his request. Too dangerous, it exposes everyone to my cells. Which is the purpose here, but not great out there. He was already shirtless, because why not? All he had to do was focus on the super move he only imagined using. Super move, transmutative mists. Izuku's body ejected cells into the air through mimicry of Nem's quirk and spread to his packmates. They instinctively held their breaths, but were reminded to breathe in the mist. It tasted and smelled odd, but they could complain as the cells began to integrate into their immune systems to cure all diseases. When it was done, the colorless mist disappeared. Everyone stood around Izuku, and he beamed at them. They looked at each other, but felt little to no different. Then again, when do you ever feel your immune system working? Izuku stepped forward and suddenly fell to his hands and knees. There was a panicked shout as Izuku never showed any kind of weakness before. Used too much energy? Too many cells at the same time? Sleepy nap time? Izuku mumbled to himself as his vision went in and out until his arms gave out. He fell face first into the sand and lay there unconscious for the first time in a decade. Else can we do? A voice said. I dunno. Mina, sing him a song or something. Another voice said. What? Why? How will that help? A nice voice said right above Izuku. A slightly gruff voice spoke up, interrupting the conversation. He waking up, Shoji's voice pierced the dark. Izuku groggily opened his eyes to the view of the cloudy sky and his pack hovering over him. The first person he saw was his mate whose lap his head lay on. She looked down at him with her hair, surrounding her face. She peered down at him worriedly. He smiled at her as the other began to ask him about his sudden unconsciousness. The sudden noise caused a spike of pain to drive into his head, and he groaned. Loud, he said as he covered his head with his hands. Everyone quieted down, and then one voice spoke up, Yaoyorozu. Izuku, you fell unconscious after you used your quirk on us. It's been a few minutes since then. Izuku curled his body at having to think again, and he felt the hands of his mate slide his hair. It helped. He curled into a ball with his head on Mina's lap. He didn't want to think at the moment. He groaned in pain like he was experiencing the worst death ever, but in reality, he just had a bad headache. Considering that Izuku hadn't had a headache in nearly a decade, it was a bad time for him. He tried to reach out to his quirk like another limb on his body, but that only increased the pain in his head. Years and years of using his quirk without restraint caused his first quirk exhaustion to be painful. I can't use my quirk, it hurts. He cried out pitifully on Mina's lap. Buddy, that's quirk exhaustion. It's different for everyone. My skin begins to crack, and I get tired when it happens to me. Kirishima said softly to a suffering Izuku. Toshi furrowed his brows. Wait, is this the first time you've had quirk exhaustion? How? He recalled all the times he saw Izuku use his quirk endlessly. Since the first day they met, he always saw Izuku use his quirk for the most mundane things to the most horrifying transformation. Not once had he shown any form of exhaustion. Izuku whimpered at the loud voice, and Mina glared at Toshi. Lower your voice. She whispered, yelled at him. Toshi did look chastised after seeing his best friend suffer more because of him. Todoroki chilled a wet towel that Yaoyorozu made and handed it to Mina, who placed it on his forehead. He sighed in some relief at the cool towel and made Izuku focus on it instead of the pain. Meanwhile, the 5 creatures made by Izuku stood guard around the pack, and their leader in case of anything threatening them while Izuku was weakened. Kaken sighed and waved to the homes they had been using for sleep. Well, nothing we can do for him. Take his butt to bed until he can stand. Yaoyorozu nodded. Good idea. Shoji, Sato, and what's he doing? She trailed off as she began to order Izuku's relocation. Izuku, for his part, was face down in the sand and digging. He did so slowly as each time he moved too much he whined in pain. His instincts kicked in, and he was digging himself a burrow until the pain receded. Only a few of his packmates knew what he was doing as they watched his slow digging process. Aizu. No. Mina tried to stop him, but he just whined. She sighed and looked at everyone for help. Yaoyorozu snapped out of it and shook her head to focus once again. Right. Sato and Shoji, do you think you guys can carry him off to bed? Or do we need to ask for Nork? The 4-armed gorilla hooted in readiness to help his pack leader. The 2 boys managed to lift Izuku off the sands, much to his whining, with some effort. A little later, Izuku lay in his and Mina's room. Luckily, it was getting late in the day, so bedtime was coming. Everyone decided to call it an early day and split off to the individual homes they shared. Izuku managed to doze off once again after being relocated, and Mina stayed by his side to watch over him. Meanwhile, Kaminari was forgotten about until Kirishima found him still unconscious but in good health in their shared room. The next morning, Izuku slowly woke while hugging something tightly to himself. It was soft but firm. He enjoyed the scent that came off it. He murmured something unintelligible and buried his face deeper in whatever he was hugging. The thing he hugged moved in a spasm, and a laugh was heard. Pulling his face away, he looked around with bleary eyes. He was burying his face in his mate's belly. Once Izuku processed that, he hugged her abdomen again and buried his face to sleep again. Izuku, that tickles. His mate jerked with a laugh. While Mina's face was burning at the feeling of Izuku's face buried in her exposed belly, she knew he didn't mean anything by it. He was just seeking comfort, and she was the best thing around, she thought smugly. Her hands stroked his messy hair as they lay there. Aizu, Mina called out quietly, no response. Aizu, louder this time, still nothing. Zu, you fall all asleep? A groan. It's been like 12 hours, and I'm hungry. Some grumbling, but no movement. Zu, I'm starving. She ummed out, and her stomach grumbled at the same time to emphasize. Hearing his mate's stomach grumble was enough for Izuku to stop being selfish, and he began to roll out of bed. He began his morning ritual by stretching every muscle with his quirk. Pain shot through his body when he tried. He cried out at the feeling of his body rebelling against him for the first time in a very long time. What's wrong? Mina jerked to full wakefulness when she heard her mate's cry of pain. Izuku sat up and felt his body with his quirk. He winced in pain when he tried to use his quirk again. He focused on a single cell on his finger, and even then it was slow to respond and caused his head to ache. He began to feel some panic at not being able to control his quirk. His quirk was the thing he always could use, the thing that was a part of him, the thing that kept him safe. Mina was at his side immediately when she saw his panic begin to rise. Izuku? What's wrong? She took his hands. Can't use my quirk, why? Did I break it? You can't break quirks, right? It hurts to use it. Why does it hurt to use it? He continued to try to force his quirk to work through the pain while panic rambling to himself. Mina hugged him in an attempt to calm him down. It's okay, Izuku. That's probably the residual quirk exhaustion from yesterday. Quirks are like muscles, right? You just pulled it yesterday. I'll be back to normal in no time. It's okay. She hugged him tightly, and he began to calm down. As they sat there with Mina's arms around Izuku, Mina tried to understand why Izuku began to panic so quickly. He was the most resilient person she knew. She thought about the day before and Toshi's mention of Izuku never going into quirk exhaustion. That could mean Izuku never pushed himself to true quirk exhaustion like today, and this was the first time experiencing it. From what she gathered, he couldn't use his quirk due to it, and caused him to panic. Feeling better? She whispered to him. When he nodded with a sniffle, she asked, You'll be able to use your quirk again, I'm sure of it. But I gotta ask, why didn't you ever react like this when Aizawa used his quirk on you? Izuku wiped his nose with the back of his hand. His quirk only affected the cells he looked at. Usually, it was most of my face, but I could still control the cells everywhere else. She thought about that with furrowed brows. What Izuku said would mean since the day he got his quirk, this was the first time not being able to use it freely. The same quirk that had been a vital part of his survival before UA. His panic would be much more understandable in that case. Either way, she sat with Izuku in her arms to comfort him until he felt ready for the day. What am I supposed to do without my quirk? Izuku sniffled. Mina snorted a quiet laugh. There are plenty of things to do without your quirk. I know, he said with a pout. After some more sulking, they joined the others for breakfast and the start of the day. His pack tried to comfort Izuku when they discovered his inability to use his quirk, but that only made him sulk even more. They decided to drag him out of the house for some sun, much to his whining. Kaken was the one to get him out of his depressed state. When he saw his old friend acting the way he was, he moved to fix it. Everyone watched as Kaken marched up to Izuku, who was lying face down on the sand. With a single moment of hesitation, he raised his hand high and then slapped it down with all his might. A loud smack sounded out, and everyone in the pack watching prayed for his survival. It caused an immediate reaction as Izuku yelped in pain and clutched at his rear. He shot up from his position in indignation to find the culprit. All he saw was Kaken sprinting away with his quirk, blasting him forward. With a yell, Izuku gave chase after the one who assaulted him. The pack watched as Izuku sprinted after Kaken at top speeds. That'll distract him for a bit, Toshi said, and pulled out a chair to laze on for the day. Izuku hunted Kaken through the city streets as he ran away. It's been an hour, and he had been closing the gap between them slowly. At first, the chase was contained on the beach. Then, Izuku cornered him on the sand. Instead of giving up, Kaken aimed his palms down and released a massive explosion to propel him up and away. The feral boy didn't like that and continued to give chase. Finding him again was easy as the strong scent of nitroglycerin was only in one place. Bakugo Katsuki was many things. He was brash, prideful, arrogant at times, and even vulgar. But one thing he wasn't was an idiot. He knew as soon as he slapped Izuku's rear to get him out of his funk with his inability to use his quirk. It wasn't hard to figure out why he was like that. His quirk was his life. It kept him alive in the woods. It was something to distract him from the reality of being abandoned. It was everything to Izuku. When you take that away from him, it is no wonder why his old friend acted the way he did when his quirk refused to work. So to help him, he slapped Izuku's but with all his strength and ran to be hunted. Both to show Izuku that he was still a hunter without his quirk and to distract him from his quirk at the same time. Pivoting around a corner using a light post, Izuku springboarded off a wall and continued to sprint after Kaken. As he ran, he instinctively tried to use his quirk to adapt as he moved. Each time he did, a twinge of pain shot through his body. It infuriated him to no end to have his quirk give up on him at such an important time, such as chasing Kakin through a city in a simulated world with monsters on every street. Most of the monsters they encountered were easy to ignore. They were small packs of monsters that any single member of his pack could defeat. Then there were the bigger monsters that loomed in the streets. Larger humanoid creatures like ogres and trolls were common. In that same large category were the common animals you'd find in the woods, only scaled to the size of a building. Snakes that could coil around a 3-story building, centipedes that clung to the underside of bridges to ambush, and the occasional giant insect. At that moment, Kakin found one of the large creatures. Specifically, a giant troll using a light post as a club. The blonde grinned and decided to use that giant as a distraction for Izuku, who was nearly frothing at the mouth to get at him. He got the attention of the troll immediately with his explosions, and a quick use of flashbang caused the troll to swing wildly as he ran past it. Kakin only looked back when he heard a roar of pain from the troll. He began to regret his choices when he saw the troll on one knee as the other bent backward with bones sticking out of it. Izuku was rapidly climbing the troll to reach its neck, which he grabbed with one arm, and then jammed his other arm into it. His hand sunk deep into the troll flesh, and then he yanked out with a primal yell. BLD and gore splattered out as Izuku ripped the troll's neck out with his bare hands. Only then did he realize he was frozen as he watched the troll try to stop the bleeding. Clutching at its neck, the troll fell on the street dead with a BLD-soaked Izuku heaving in large breaths. Looking closer at his old friend's hands, he saw they were slightly transformed into claws. Only the tips of the fingers were sharp. Kakin felt his BLD freeze when Izuku's head snapped up to lock eyes with him. Kakin moved first with a flashbang and smokescreen combo. A roar of pain notified him that Izuku was blinded for a little bit as he tried to make distance from the annoyed hunter. Hours after Izuku ran after Kakin, Toshi lay on the towel on the sand. By his side was Jairu, who read a book she got from somewhere. She was the one who broke the silence. "You think he's dead?" Toshi hummed in thought. "Most likely." Some more silence, and then he went into the city. Toshi nodded with his eyes closed. Completely lost. "Holy hell." Someone yelled in the near distance. "Or not," Toshi said blandly, already knowing who came back at the exclamation. He turned to see Izuku dragging a limp Kakin by the foot through the sand. Kakin was drenched in sweat and looked like he hadn't stopped running for hours, which Toshi could believe. Izuku, for his part, was heaving in breaths and covered in BLD, wounds, and little bits of gore. "At least he is more or less back to his usual self," Toshi grumbled, and received a slap to his arm from Jairu at his comment. So, this was the end of part 12 of this series. Stay tuned for next part of this series, and if you like this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Until next time.